9/11, exclamation point. September the 11th, 2001 forever changed air travel in America. We went from fly the friendly skies to the long security lines we experience at every airport. This evening on The Rock Newman Show, a look at airport security with airport security expert Dr. Stacy Tyler, author of a new book, The Inside Man. We're also joined by retired air traffic controller Will Bailey. That's coming up right now on The Rock Newman Show. Welcome to The Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University in Washington, D.C. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. This evening, we look at airport security. How safe are we in the air or at the airport? We'll explore that with airport security expert and lecturer Dr. Stacy Tyler, author of a new book, The Inside Man. We're also joined by Will Bailey, a Howard University alum and former D.C. metro area air traffic control specialist. He did that for 20 years. Thank both of you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell you what, before I start with each of you, I'd like to do something to share with my audience. I sent a text message about 3 weeks ago. And I sent it to a lady. Her name was Miss Teresa Pryor. I said, "Greetings, Miss Pryor. I host the Rock Newman Show on PBS station WHUT in Washington, D.C. On Wednesday, November the 14th, we will host Dr. Stacy Tyler to discuss airline safety. We would like for you or your daughter, Sierra, to join us to share your thoughts about the tragic loss of your son, Aaron. I can be reached," and I gave her my telephone number. She responded by saying, "So sorry. We are still mourning the loss of my son. So no, not at this time. Plus, we're still in litigation." I responded and said, "I understand. Condolences." Dr. Tyler, I wanted to start there to really kind of jar our listening audience here today into paying attention to something that is critical. We are airing this show exactly 1 week prior to the busiest day of the travel year.
Right.
And Mrs. Pryor talks about not being able to come here to discuss the loss of our son who was killed at the Philadelphia airport. He was someone who was one of your former employees.
That's correct.
One, can you please tell us, as we discuss airline security, how it is that her son died, which obviously means there was a colossal failure of security?
Absolutely. Aaron Jenkins was my employee. I was the general manager for GAT at the Philadelphia International Airport, and I had JetBlue Airlines underneath my leadership. And I hired Aaron Jenkins as a ramp employee. That's how I came to know Mr. Jenkins.
Right.
Well, now when it comes to myself as a leader, and my study in airport security, dealing with the miscommunication of TSA policies down to the frontline employees, preventing weapons, contraband, and prohibited items passing through security checkpoint and or access point. So in this case with Aaron Jenkins, it's a complete failure because the weapon that was utilized, it was a knife. It was deemed as a box cutter. Regardless, it's still a prohibited item that penetrated the security access point by using the employee's SITA badge and getting it passed through security.
So there was some sort of conflict with he and another gentleman.
Absolutely.
The
yes.
other gentleman used a weapon
Right.
that should have been picked up by security that he should not have been able to have.
Right. Well, let me clarify. As far as airline employees, we have a SITA badge that we use to gain access through the security access point.
Okay.
We don't have to go through security checkpoints as passengers.
Right.
Okay. So we utilize our SITA badges.
Yeah.
So with those badges, you can bring anything through unless there's random security checks that's conducted.
Right.
Okay, by TSA.
As an employee.
As an employee. So those checks are randomly done. Okay.
Let me just ask you a question. Those checks are randomly done. Would you advocate that they not be randomly done? That everybody that comes through checks? What are you suggesting?
Well, there's only 4 airports throughout the aviation system that are at 100% screening. Now, at 100% screening, that means that passengers and airline and airport employees are being screened at 100% screening.
Because what jumps out at me is here's a gentleman who lost his life due to a weapon.
Correct.
And whether or not that person with that weapon or someone with very bad intent, terrorist or otherwise,
Correct.
who is an employee,
might
be able to have access to a wider body of individuals. And if that person got through and killed someone, this person with these bad intents could get through and kill a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Which means that we're extraordinarily unsafe.
Correct. So in Aaron Jenkins' case, the altercation took place in a break room. And I'm not saying that, you know, this person had every intent to kill.
Sure.
So,
but something happened.
And
he had the weapon.
And there was an altercation, not between the person who murdered him. He had an altercation with somebody else. This person just happened to jump in to break up the fight. But what actually transpires that Aaron threw the employee who murdered him across the room. He gets up, reaches in his pocket, gets the weapon, and then stabs him in his upper thigh. So, and then there's an emergency response, delay.
Absolutely tragic.
Correct.
We're going to discuss much more about this because you have written a book called The Inside Man that discusses evaluating security communication failures at United States commercial airports. Folks, many of you are going to be traveling on next Wednesday and through the rest of the season, the holiday season. And these are things that you're going to need to be aware of. And we want to examine much of that. This book is frightening. It is, we find it so extraordinarily well done in research, and we want to talk a bunch about it.
Absolutely.
Before we do, I want to welcome again you, Will Bailey. Will, I started off today's broadcast by I said 9/11 exclamation point. And we talked about September 11 changing how flying in America and really throughout the world was impacted by that very tragic day. It is my understanding that you as an air traffic controller were on duty that day, 9/11, September the 11th, 2011.
Affirmative, 2001.
2001.
Yes.
Right.
You were on duty. What's the first you heard about the madness that was unfolding?
When the supervisor basically just shouted a command over the area saying, okay, everybody be careful, somebody just hit the Trade Center. And the first glance, I'm like, Trade Center, what does that mean? And I kind of assumed that maybe a small private pilot clipped the corner of it or something like that. So never in my mind would I even consider imagining that a commercial airline would actually run into the Trade Center.
I think I've told this story on the air before. If not, I've certainly told it on Facebook. The plane that took off from Dulles that hit the Pentagon is a plane that many of my family and friends thought I was on because it's the plane I always took on Monday morning when I came back here. I had taken another flight, thank God. You then, though, when people started to gather themselves, it is my understanding that you were directly responsible for helping pilots and jets to come out of the air and land. Would it have been in just this area?
Well, yeah, there's three components of air traffic when you're talking about who actually talks to the actual airplanes. There's a tower jurisdiction, of course. When they leave the tower, they go to what's called approach control, where they actually sequence the jets going in and out of the airports. And then us, at that time I was working at the Washington En route center, which handles—
Washington En route center?
Affirmative. Yeah, it handles all the airplanes. Basically,
You retired, right?
Affirmative. Yes.
Affirmative, that's right.
Yeah,
But you didn't retire affirmative.
Right.
Oh, my apologies.
No problem, no problem.
Force of habit. We basically keep the airplanes from, keep them apart, keep them separated, keep them in sequence. So during rush hour, we're the ones who actually sequence them and actually get them running to the airports nice and smoothly. So with regards to what happened that day, yes, the approach control actually handles those airplanes. We were responsible for taking care of them once they leave approach control or when they're coming back to approach control.
Okay, so give me an example of what communication you're providing. Are you once you take over approach control, are you the voice that's talking to a pilot? Or is that—
Yes, sir.
And tell me something that you remember from that time, man. This is some fascinating stuff to me.
Well, the funniest thing about that is I assumed that everything happened in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But we were given different directives. After the first one hit the tower, we were given one directive. Then the second one hit the tower, we got another directive. Then I remember supervisor going and shouting, "Okay, everybody pay attention. We just lost one in Pennsylvania." And Pennsylvania airspace was adjacent to the airspace I was working. It's in this New York Center, but it was right adjacent to where I was working. And so now I'm confused. And then they came back and yelled, "All right, everybody pay attention. They just got the Pentagon." And I jumped out of my chair. What do you mean, got the Pentagon? That's right up the street. So it was, and it's not at all hazy, but in order to get into that conversation, it's going to be a long conversation because so many things transpired within a few seconds.
Yeah.
And we were given different directives. At one time, we were ordered to, at that point, we had to make sure, of course, we keep the standard level of operation going with separation. So the pilots knew absolutely nothing was going on.
Yeah.
And we were just ordered to move airplanes around and then eventually get every airplane out of the sky and put them on the ground immediately.
Yeah.
So basically grounding every flight.
Yeah.
And so it was a contentious time that literally took about a little bit over 2 hours, I believe, because I think this happened shortly after 9 a.m. And by the time I got to the cafeteria on break, when every airplane was on the ground, it was after 11.
Yeah.
And that was a day that we can talk about that for days.
So I'm on a plane. I'm on a plane.
Yes.
Instead of taking the plane that I normally take that flew into the Pentagon, I took a plane from a national airport. It was National Airline that I didn't even know existed until that weekend. So my plane took off at like 8:30. The flight hit the Pentagon that everyone thought I was on at whatever that was, 8:42. So we didn't know anything until about an hour or so into the flight. The plane started to make several banks, and we were like, what's going on? The pilot came on and said, there's some sort of this I remember, there's an air traffic hold, and no one knew what really that meant. And finally, the plane that I was on, which was bound nonstop to Las Vegas, was grounded in St. Louis, Missouri. And by the time we were starting to hit the ground, some people with their cell phones, my cell phone had died, people with cell phones started saying that the World Trade Center had been hit. And the lady I was sitting next to, I just remember her saying, "This is lunacy, this is lunacy." Dr. Tyler, I come back to you. In your book here, you articulate and illuminate that the TSA, was that Transportation Security Administration, was formed on the heels of 9/11.
Correct.
And can you walk us through what Transportation Security Administration is supposed to do and how it all works? What? No. Before we go there, I'm sorry. What, were you on duty on 9/11?
I just landed back. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I just landed back from Jackson, Mississippi. I was a general manager at the time for TWA in Jackson, Mississippi, and I just arrived early in the morning, and but I did not get impacted because I was home. So it didn't impact me
so you
personally,
actually,
but it impacted my family.
Yeah.
My mother was working in the airline industry at the time.
Yeah.
My younger sister, so job losses. My station closed. You know, so the impact of 9/11, it just ran rapid for the aviation industry.
Okay. So out of this tragedy, which people said, you know, there was a failure to imagine that a human being would get in a plane and sacrifice his life and fly into the World Trade Center. That hey, you know, the defense for not being able to block that was that no one could even imagine that happened, but it did. And out of it, the Transportation Security Administration was formed. And your description, explanation of what their role and responsibility is, can you please share that?
Yes. Well, before the Transportation Security Administration, the Federal Aviation Administration was in charge of the passenger screening and also the baggage screening, along with cargo. So the FAA had control over what the TSA had taken over. So the passenger and baggage screening became federalized. Meaning that the government is in control of the passenger and baggage screening. So the whole gamut for the TSA, excuse me, is to screen those passengers, bags, cargo. Not only that, there's customs, there's borders, there's a whole gamut when it comes to the Transportation Security Administration.
You know, and you point out something, and in some discussions that I've had with you, it's just, you know, maybe I should have known it. Maybe most people should, but probably most people don't. That as a result of the formation of this, TSA, Transportation Security Administration, that cost. It cost a lot of money. And so therefore, every time the passenger flies, the passenger to some extent is paying, underwriting the cost of the security that the Transportation Security Administration is supposed to provide. So the passenger has a right, as a paying customer and paying for this service, to walk to an airport and to feel very confident
that they're going to be safe and secure.
And are they?
That's a good question. Are they? I can say from my research that there has been a lot of infractions that have been occurring since the implementation of the TSA into the aviation system. There was a video that came out last year at this time that there's a 95% failed rate when it comes for the TSA or the TSO officers to detect.
And TSO is?
The Transportation Security Officers.
Okay.
Okay, and it's a 95% failed rate when it comes to capturing those prohibited items, weapons, and contraband. And it's a congressional hearing.
I lived in Las Vegas for 13 years.
Yes.
When I hear 95% failed rate, I wouldn't want to bet that I would get on a plane and be safe these days. I mean, and now, obviously, so many people doing this is not to at all be, you know, unduly alarming the public. But whatever the truth is and what facts are is what we try to bring out here at the Rock Newman Show. 95%.
95% failed rate. So that's not including my research, because that is just only the passenger screening process. My research deals with the miscommunication of TSA policies down to the frontline employees, where we are bringing those weapons, contraband, and prohibited items through. So that means that those CITA badges that are around our necks on our lanyard, that's the gateway of the world. So whenever we, as airline employees, receive those CITA badges, we are required to take training, two different courses, airport security and drive. And what I can say to you, I have 22 years in the airline industry. I have developed stations from the ground floor for 5 different carriers. I have been throughout the entire aviation system, whether you're hub operation, whether you're field location.
Yeah.
My mother retired from the airline industry, as I mentioned before.
You got airports and airlines in your DNA.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what I can tell you is that it is the same information that is minimum training, that there's only 4 requirements that the airline and airport employees are instructed to follow when we have the training to receive the SITA badge at the beginning of our employment.
Is it easy to articulate what those 4 are? I mean, just kind of bullet point.
Yes.
Okay.
The 4, wear your badge so it's visible on the outermost garment, above your waist, no piggybacking, secure all doors. So those are the protocols, those are instructions that are given so that we can keep the airport safe.
Okay.
Yes.
Will Bailey, as an air traffic control person, you're hired by whom?
Federal Aviation Administration, FAA.
That was so you were originally hired by the FAA. You know, we have a little clip here about air traffic. Let's take a look.
Airport ops. This is following the approach control. Yes, we have a 757, 20 miles northwest, not talking to anyone, headed toward the airport with a suspected bomb on board. We are evacuating the control tower and the approach control. Roger that, sir. Roger.
It is generally articulated that air traffic controllers have some of the most stressful jobs that anyone in the world has. Did you feel that way while you were doing your job?
Well, stress is relative. The fact is, we do a job that anybody can do, but most people won't do it because of, I mean, you know, you have thousands of people's lives in your hands at any given time in the day. And just to go back to the first part about the Pentagon, yeah, I knew 2 people who actually died in the Pentagon. One was actually on the plane, the parent of a son who I was coaching youth football in Loudoun County, and Howard Grad. He was our commander when I was in ROTC at Howard, and he was actually working in the Pentagon at that time. But with reference to this part of it, the stress is relative. Once you train, you know, of course, certain things are going to happen when things get elevated. But with regards to the safety component, 9/11, there's a huge system of checks and balances within our agency where we actually do our work. So in order for something to happen, like she was talking about protocols, and several things have to happen before we end up screwing up and allowing a commercial airline to actually run into the tower. So with relative to the first time I heard them say one airplane hit the Trade Center, I didn't even blink real hard because I knew it was something simple. There's no way in the world that something you know, that complicated could possibly happen. So yes, it's always a stressful situation. However, you know, once you're trained, you get comfortable, and you're not necessarily reacting to anything anymore. You're responding to each situation based on your training.
Yeah, and just for our viewing audience, that clip was of Flight 93 that ultimately crashed on 9/11. So one of the things that I wanted to do, and we just didn't have permission for it, was to play the video, the audio, from an event that took place out on the West Coast in Seattle this August, not 17 years ago like 9/11, just this August, where a airline employee,
ground service employee,
takes a plane. Yeah, he takes the plane. He steals the plane, and he gets up in the air. He takes off.
Right.
He is talking to the air traffic tower, saying, "I guess I'm just a guy with a screw loose." And he asks, "Can we do black flips?" "Well, I'll do a belly roll."
Yeah.
And you hear all of this audio, and I wanted my audience to hear it, but I'm sharing it with you now.
Right.
So, can you, from your perspective on the ground, tell us sort of the nuts and bolts of one, how that happened, and what could have been done what should have been done to prevent that.
Right.
And then I want to talk to you about once he's in the air.
Okay, so Mr. Russell, that's his name.
Okay.
He was a ground service agent for Alaska Airlines, Horizon, and the plane was actually scheduled for line maintenance. Okay, so
for line maintenance.
Maintenance. So that means that the plane was positioned probably in a remote location.
Okay.
So when any plane is left unattended, that means that it's not in service for any revenue flight.
Yeah.
The agent literally did a tow bar and tug procedure.
Okay.
That means that when he approached the plane, which was left unattended, which is secured.
Yeah.
The plane is secured, meaning that the panels, the doors are locked.
Okay.
Okay. He got into the tug, the tow bar, attached it to the plane,
Right.
attached the tug to the tow bar, repositioned it 180 degrees and facing towards the runway.
Right.
Okay. He removed
Yeah.
the equipment and accessed the doors.
So you know, in this little brain I have here, I'm thinking, you know, if somebody steals your car, if somebody looks in your car and sees the keys, it's like, oh wow, they got the keys in there, so it can't be locked. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna steal your car.
Right.
So, I mean, not to trivialize this, but did a pilot leave the key in the plane? I mean, because I'm just trying to figure out. It's supposed to be secured.
Right.
How did the dude get there? How did he get there and then take off? Huh?
If you think about it, there have to be certain levels of security. And even with employees, the first thing happens is background checks. Background checks, evaluations to see if you're mentally stable. But then after that, they base your job title, your access based on your job title. Yeah. So if he actually had access to the airplane like that, obviously he had some authority to actually be in that area. And if you think about it, with every single aspect of society, including ours, you know, they get to a certain point, basically we're on our own. Now, they're still over us. There's always a supervisor in the area. There's always command center always looking at. So if I have an airplane going towards Newark and it veers off course, it's not just me, or there's a controller next to me, the controller in the next place, metering, approaching. Everybody's actually looking at that same airplane every single second. So even if I screw up, a lot of other people have to screw up too and ignore the situation in order for something bad to happen. But I mean, there are these small windows of opportunity where something like this can happen.
And because I couldn't put this down, I want to come to you on this because what you're saying is, it's almost like the standard operating procedure for the three different agencies, TSA, the airline, and airport. That there is a sense of territorialism amongst each. There is too much.
There's too much.
Too much territorialism and too little proper communication. And your book screams loudly about the need for there to be not just communication, but much better communication between the three agencies.
Absolutely. My book definitely stems on the communication that is lacking within the three entities. Okay, and my theoretical construct for the book is the WIC 1979 Organizational Information Theory. That means that it's the way that the information is transferred down to the frontline employees within the three entities. Okay, WIC's 1979 Organizational Information Theory focused on the process of communication, the process of getting the information down to the frontline employees within the three entities, which are the lack of information or lack of uncertainty, which that means that if the information is passed down properly, then there won't be no uncertainty. The 95% failure, the Horizon airline who stole the plane, the information you know that needs to come down to the frontline employee. Secondly is interdependence promotes transparency, meaning that there are 20 units within the layers of security for TSA, starting with intelligence, ending with the passengers. So there are 20 units within TSA structure that if there's a policy change, it has to trickle all the way down to the passengers.
And you position in your book here that is a failure of communicating from the top to the bottom,
to make sure that the traveling public is safe. So
the traveling public, make sure the traveling public who is safe, who is paying a tax to be safe.
Correct. Okay, so within that budget, the $7.9 billion budget that was just approved at the beginning of the year, there's a security tax on every segment of a ticket. So that means that it's up to $6.60 times 2 if you're returning back. So that is the tax, that's the cost for the traveling public to pay the government so we can get our money back. You understand?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so within the transparency of those policies being transferred down to the frontline employees so that we can make sure that we are doing our jobs properly so that the traveling public would be safe. And policies such as the 311.
What's that mean?
311 is 3.4 ounces.
Oh, okay. Stuff you can carry on. Dangerous.
Because that policy came about was August 10th, 2006 terrorist attack, Great Britain terrorist attack that occurred where the terrorist plot was in the form of liquid. So now that, because of that, because TSA policies are ever evolving, whatever happens out here in society, we have to accommodate. We have to do, have a policy to make sure that the traveling public is safe. So hence, the 311 policy came about. So the plot actually unfoiled August 9th, 2006. By August 10th, 2006, I am literally at work and the line is out the door because now TSA is confiscating all liquids in jails. And as an operations manager, it's like, where are all the passengers? They're stuck at the security checkpoint because that information wasn't communicated
out to those passengers, to you,
to the employee group, so that we can make sure that we can accommodate those passengers. So here we have performance, so we had to leave the passengers behind, the bags, the passengers, the tickets, the reaccommodation, because of something just happened immediately.
So that's, that's kind of that's a real good example of what happens with a failure to communicate, on a micro level. So you have people who paid for tickets, who are trying to go see loved ones and all the rest, and they can't go because of this internal screw up. Not a good thing. Okay. Now over here on page 52 in your book, we talk about a 9-year-old boy with a history of stealing cars and running away, sneaked onto a plane bound for Texas. He snuck on a plane because this little 9-year-old boy found the Southwest Airlines boarding pass. Okay, there are other examples. An Iraqi immigrant with a suspicious device stuffed into a body cavity was detained at Los Angeles International Airport. He was going to Philadelphia. When we were speaking, you mentioned drug smuggling. On a large scale. That involved airline employees, airport security people? Can you talk to us about that?
Okay, so the infractions that are occurring, this is what I'm referring to with my research. As far as this policy being miscommunicated down to the frontline employees, preventing those items passing through security checkpoints and or access points. So now you're having the airline and airport employees misusing those CITA badges that are given. So now, within the aviation industry, we have incidences, infractions that have been occurring.
Yeah.
I can take you 2013. We had a drug smuggling ring out of Philadelphia, a cocaine drug smuggling ring, where this employee smuggled 150.
You were the general manager of the station, but you weren't the general manager of that drug smuggling ring.
No, and this is in 13. I was there, but I wasn't the general manager at the time. I was with U.S. Airways. Right. In fact, I was with U.S. Airways at the time.
Okay.
And what happened is that this employee smuggled 153 pounds of cocaine for a Dominican Republic drug smuggling ring. We have in 2014, a gentleman by the name of Eugene Harvey, a Delta Airline employee, who smuggled 156 firearms through the security access point.
And so let's stop right there. Let's stop right there, because I thought when we talked on the phone that I heard you say that.
Yes.
So an airline employee smuggled onto
over 20 aircrafts.
156
firearms.
Firearms.
Yes.
Yeah. So paying public that you're paying that tax to be safe.
Yes, it's 153. It's 153.
Okay.
Give or
take three Uzis.
Right.
All right. We are smiling and we are laughing, but man, this ain't no joke.
I know, right?
Will, I want to come back to you again. I find it an extraordinarily interesting career that you've had after you graduated from the Mecca Howard University. Can you please share with us what was the most, other than 9/11, share with us some of your most challenging times, something either that was most frightening, that you are most pleased about your participation. I know you're not a guy that ever want to brag about yourself, but let it rip.
Well, that's a tough one, because any given day you can actually have an incident or two or three or four or five that would basically, what I say, sting you. Every few weeks or so you'd have something happen that literally, when you go take a break, you really need to take a break.
Right.
And I remember once. The things that affect air traffic basically are during rush hour, bad weather. When the airport's holding, because then we got a lot of airports in the sky and things. So as long as
hold on. See, you guys are veterans. Me and my audience here, we haven't worked in the airline. So rush hour.
Rush hour. Just imagine it
when
this way.
Traffic is heavy in the air.
Just imagine it this way. Air traffic for us, basically, if you took a map of this entire area and notated all of the streets, the highways, the intersections, and you put that in the sky. Basically, there are airways in the sky. So just like when you're on 95 and you connected to 495 or 210, and during rush hour, you got a lot of traffic merging into the same places because everybody leaves at the same time and gets back at the same time. That's the same thing in air travel.
Okay.
And so during rush hour, everything is fine. Let's go back to the street. On the highway, everything is fine until what? Weather gets bad, it gets slippery, somebody has a car accident. And window accidents happen when people are not paying attention on their cell phone and some other things like that. The air is basically the same way as far as we're concerned. Things get a little bit complicated when the weather gets bad because certain airports get shut down, and now we don't divert those aircraft right away. We follow a normal protocol and put those airports in holding, of course, after we get the command to do so. And so basically, when we slow airplanes down, slowest feasible speed, because of course they have to keep going fast or else they fall out of the sky, then we have to do something to them until you make room on the ground at the airport so we can get them. So we put them in holding patterns. And I remember the most specific one I've ever had since we've gotten started with this was, it was halfway through my career. It was probably early 2000s. This was after 9/11. It was early 2000s where we were actually, it was busy, very busy. Every airport in the Northeast Corridor was closing. Teterboro, LaGuardia, Atlantic City, Philadelphia, Newark, Kennedy, every airport, and we handle all that traffic going up there. So if you can imagine the amount of airplanes that's in the sky.
Did you say they were closed? All of them?
All of them.
All of them are
yeah,
closed.
weather was bad. So now we're holding, and basically they're taking one out at a time as they can get some room at the airport. So imagine, you know, airports, you know, have, you know, 7 airplanes holding here from say 25,000 to 30,000 feet, here and here. So these holding patterns with no room in the middle. And then the controller before me calls and said, hey, you know, we got one coming to you, NORDO, which means no radio contact. Nobody's talking to him. So if the airplane is not talking to us, his last command, he's just going to follow it. So they found his flight, and they knew where he was going, so I had to move airplanes from out of a holding pattern. So one guy wasn't responding fast enough, and literally, it's, you know, the airplanes tell each other what to do. So just imagine if one thing goes wrong, and the airplane tells this airplane to climb, this airplane to climb, this one to turn, and then it's almost a chaotic situation if you allow it to be. It's an extremely stressful situation, but because of the training, we're completely in control of the entire thing. But I'm telling you, I can literally look down and I could see my shirt popping off my chest because my heart's beating so fast. But then when we reviewed the tape afterwards, my voice didn't change, I didn't move in my seat, everything was completely normal. So the type of stress that we deal with, we can't, we're trained to basically respond to every situation. I tell this to people all the time, most jobs or most careers, you can kind of be familiar with a certain subject and get by with it. Ours, you have to know the information verbally, you have to know the information specifically, verbatim. And at any given moment, you have to be able to regurgitate it appropriately to that situation. So that level of confidence actually reduces the stress some. However, the toll it takes on your body after a certain amount of time, it beats you up badly.
I can imagine.
So Dr. Tyler, you know, part of what your book explains, I watched a video that you did at the Philadelphia airport where you had Philadelphia employees, and they were, when I constantly heard a theme that was coming out of your presentation, and then when you asked questions, you got the employees to sort of open up probably like they rarely ever do. And they talked, so they're the inside men and women.
Absolutely.
And they talk about their concerns. And their concerns, the theme was laxity, was inconsistent communication, failure to communicate. And at the reason I wanted to make sure that we did this show was to highlight what you've done in all of your research in producing this book. Now, part of what you are attempting to do, if I understand it correctly, is you're trying to appeal to the TSA, airports, airlines, to alert them to your findings, to have each of them to improve their systems. You have developed curriculums that would help them do that. And when you communicate to them, what kind of response are you getting?
That's excellent, Brock. That's excellent. Absolutely, that's the basis. And I have developed a 10-course Homeland Security curriculum, including 2 online courses to help and to improve the airport security process for new hires, and also the training for recurrent employees within the aviation system. So you got to understand that whenever you're looking at the dynamics at the at any airport, there's only 3 legacy carriers left: United, American, and Delta. Now they have strict protocols, strict training, recurrent training. I would throw Southwest Airlines in that mix also, because they have been in existence for quite some time. But now you have a lot of contractors that are evolving, who are doing the same exact job as the legacy carriers, the airlines. So it's seamless, so you couldn't even tell who is a contractor and who is an airline legacy employed.
And those contractors are doing what kind of work for the airline?
Same. Ticket counter, gate, ramp, same thing.
So,
you will never know the difference.
So independent contractor.
Correct.
Hired by the agency.
Hired by a contracting company.
Okay.
Hired by the airline to do the job.
Okay.
It's a contract.
Okay, and so then,
it's
critical.
Spirit Airlines,
so now you have
JetBlue
another
Airlines.
area that is so critical in there being communication.
Correct. To have the policies trained properly.
Yeah.
To have the information to have the information, the TSA policies, to be trained effectively down to the frontline employees.
Yeah.
So with those online classes, there's an online framework. I am also a professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So I teach online courses worldwide. So I have students all over the world.
Okay.
So this framework would be, common nature for myself. So my goal is to implement training within each, not just the major, I'm talking about each airport, so that there would be no lax protocols and no inconsistency, because when it comes to the internal threat, this is what we're talking about. This is deemed as the internal threat. And to make sure that those policies are trained properly, because when it comes to the security aspect, each airline, we have a corporate security department, okay? A corporate security department or a regulatory compliance department, where that information that comes from Department of Homeland Security or TSA, any kind of government agency, they get this information. That information is then transferred or sent to the leadership.
Right.
Okay? So where and when that information coming from leadership all the way down to the frontline employees, where's the gap? How do we fill that gap with security? Changes in policy from TSA.
Right.
So how do we know?
In your years of research and writing this book and doing your thesis and getting your PhD, in addition to that, I tried to find somebody else like you.
There isn't.
That's an interesting comment. I didn't know you were going to make that, but I tried to find somebody else like you who has done this kind of research, who also has grown up in the industry, so that you're not just doing research and interviewing airline employees, airline personnel, TSA, and the rest. You've lived that life.
I have real life experiences.
Okay. And so, unapologetically here at the Rock Newman Show, we don't mind being change agents.
There you go. This is social change.
And as a as a change agent, if we've got our hands around this the way I think the staff and I have, is that there's an incredible need for improvement throughout each of these TSA, airline, and airport.
Correct.
And again, you've gotten quite a bit of resistance for them to, one, acknowledge the problem.
Correct.
And two, to fix the problem.
Right. So I have, I've done my due diligence as far as meeting with certain politicians. Along the way, I've met with CEOs of airports, security team. Not the CEO itself, because they will transfer that information, send that information to their security personnel, who's in charge of security. So whenever I am invited to speak with the individual and this information comes out, it's like, wait, how? Okay, it's not received because
it's a resistance.
It's a resistance because it will shed light on their job function. So I
shed light on the things that they're not properly doing.
Correct.
So what they're doing is they're protecting their flank at the risk of the public, the passenger being unprotected.
There you go. Absolutely. So
Will Bailey, let me come back to you.
okay.
Will Bailey, you have a very unique, you retired a few years ago, you have a very unique operation where you, part of what you're doing is you're very much into the world of fitness. And you have a place out in Fort Washington, Maryland that I think is going to be, a magnet for people who are interested in fitness and health. But as it relates to what we're talking about today, you initiated a few years ago a STEM program. And you have things that you are teaching kids about aviation. So at this time where we are exposing some of the failures, and hopefully those who are involved in not protecting the failures will understand the value of what Dr. Tyler is trying to bring. But now you're telling young kids, what are you teaching young kids about this world?
That's a very broad question that would take a long time.
About this world of aviation.
But the specific one is this. It's I'm based on my own experience. When I started with air traffic, I knew nothing about airplanes. Matter of fact, I think I've only been on an airplane once when I went to grad school for air traffic in '93. And I knew nothing about air traffic, knew nothing about aviation, had the opportunity, aced the FAA exam, and I got the opportunity to go to Minnesota to grad school. When we first got there, everything looked Greek. Literally, they put this huge map in front of you and say you have to be able to draw this from scratch in a week, or else, if you don't get 90%, you go home. And so the stress behind that alone, and I'm looking at the map, and once we figured out a way to learn the map, of course, once we got down to the components of air traffic, it's basically three-dimensional thinking. That's why when I was explaining something earlier, I started to do this and I put my hands down because I can't really picture that on the screen, but it's a different level of thinking in order to be able to be a successful air traffic controller. You have to be able to not just analyze situation, not just take different bits of information and put them in and apply them. It's a lot of things that go into that requires, look, you have to have some level of arrogance to do my job. It's as simple as that. And I used to say confidence because everybody says confidence, but no, you have to be arrogant to do this job. But you become successful because of your ability to solve problems. So with reference to my STEM program, I initially just wanted to do an air traffic school because I would start the kids off the same way, and then it evolved into STEM because now we do robotics, Lego engineering, computer programming. We're building a space shuttle at my place in Fort Washington. Rather than just exposing kids to this component, we actually challenged them. The same way we did when we got started. You put something in front of them that makes, there's no way in the world I can do this. And then you either tell them you do it or you go home, you're out of the program. That we won't be that graphic, but of course, a week later or 2 weeks later, they'll realize what they're doing, and then we'll remind them, hey, remember 2 weeks ago when you thought this was, you couldn't do it? And eventually that level of training and that level of confidence, once they start learning something they didn't know what they could do before.
For our viewing audience, how can they get in touch with you for this fascinating program for kids?
Willpower247.com.
Willpower247.com.
Affirmative.
Dr. Taylor, I want to come back to you. I cannot believe we only have like a couple of minutes left here. But I want to ask you, after all these years in the business and this kind of research that you've done, you now have painted a picture today that we should be concerned, if not alarmed. What is your goal? What is your dream that would happen out of all this work that you've done, that the airlines, the TSA, the airports would do what?
My goal is to ensure that the traveling public is safe by ensuring that every airline and airport employee is trained properly on the TSA policies, implementing my training in every airport throughout the country, online platform, and also classroom format.
And obviously that's been an uphill battle.
Correct.
Yeah. Again, as you explained, there is a resistance to exposing what the problems are. I mean, is there any strategy? We only have a minute and 30 seconds. Is there anything the flying public can do to help put pressure on those to make them safe?
Yes. Well, there's a person that I would love for you guys to contact, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman.
Okay.
That's out of the 12th Congressional District in New Jersey. And I have her contact number.
Okay.
Do you want me to say?
Please do. Please do. We're trying to make people safe.
It's in the D.C. office, area code 202-223-5801, and that is the political environment, but also the largest airport association is called AAAE. That is the American Airline Executives for the airports. Okay, so it's AAAE, and the two individuals' names that I would love to give out is Pat Racker and Tico Coleman. Okay. And they could be reached at area code 703-797-2552 to get your voices heard, to make sure that this kind of training, it is prevalent within the aviation industry, to ensure that the airline employees are trained properly, so there could be some cohesiveness for the traveling public.
Thank you so very much for both of you being here for today. Folks, thank you for joining us this evening. For more information on this program or any other program produced by WHUT, go to WHUT.org. Good night, be safe, and may God bless you.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.